She weighed 297 pounds and was about to face her 18th job interview, but the humiliation she suffered in the interview room changed her life forever. Caroline took a deep breath before entering the imposing glass and steel building. Her 297 pounds distributed across her ample body made each step require extra effort. Sweat was already forming small droplets on her forehead, despite the cold air conditioning blowing in the lobby. She adjusted the black suit she had bought especially for this interview, the largest size she could find in the store, a size 22, which still felt a bit tight on her arms and hips. "You can do this, Carol," she murmured to herself, while checking once more the impeccable resume she carried in her folder. Graduated with honors in business administration, postgraduate degree, fluent in 3 languages, and with 7 years of market experience. Her qualifications were unquestionable, but Caroline knew that often her 297 pounds screamed louder than her resume. Upon reaching the reception on the 12th floor, the thin and elegant woman behind the counter looked her up and down with an expression Caroline knew well. It was a mixture of surprise and judgment, as if silently saying, "What is an obese woman like you doing here?" "Good morning. I have an interview scheduled with Mr. Mendez at 10 a.m. My name is Caroline Rivera," she said, keeping her voice firm and her gaze direct. The receptionist typed something into the computer and responded without looking at Caroline. "You can wait in the waiting room. Someone will come get you." Caroline sat in one of the armchairs in the waiting area, noticing how the seat seemed small for her voluminous body. Her hips overflowed past the arms of the chair, causing discomfort that she tried to ignore. She looked around, observing the other candidates, all thin, elegant, fitting perfectly into the corporate standard. After 20 minutes of waiting, a young woman in an impeccable blazer and high heels called her name. "Caroline, please follow me." Entering the meeting room, Caroline saw 3 people seated at the table, 2 women in well-tailored suits and a middle-aged man with a serious expression. They all looked at her with that same barely disguised expression of surprise that she had seen thousands of times before. "Good morning, Caroline. I'm Richard Mendez, HR Director. These are Patricia, our marketing manager, and Louise, supervisor of the department you're applying for." Caroline extended her hand to greet them, noticing how their gazes fixed on her obese body. She sat in the indicated chair, feeling it creak slightly under her weight of 297 pounds. The interview began with standard questions about past experiences and qualifications. Caroline responded with confidence, demonstrating knowledge and competence. However, she noticed the exchanged glances between the interviewers, the raised eyebrows, the contained smiles. "Your experience is impressive, Caroline," commented Patricia, "but our work pace is quite intense. It requires dynamism, agility. Do you believe you could keep up?" Caroline recognized the subtext immediately. The question wasn't about her professional competencies, but about her obese body, about whether her 297 pounds would prevent her from being dynamic and agile, code words for thin in the corporate environment. Before she could respond, Louise added, "Additionally, our company highly values image. Our employees represent our brand to clients." Caroline felt her stomach sink. There she was again, being judged not by the content of her resume or her character, but by the width of her hips and the number that appeared on the scale. Her mind raced to the dozens of previous interviews, all ending similarly, with polite refusals and vague promises of, "We'll be in touch." Richard Mendez cleared his throat, seeming slightly uncomfortable, and said, "What Louise is trying to say is that we're looking for people who fit into the company culture. Understand?" Caroline took a deep breath, feeling the weight of Richard's words on her shoulders, already tired from carrying not just her 297 pounds, but also all the prejudices that came with them. For a moment, she thought about just smiling, thanking them, and leaving that room with whatever dignity she had left. It was what she always did. "Of course I understand, Mr. Mendez," said Caroline, adjusting herself in the chair that continued to protest under her weight. "I understand perfectly what you're trying to say, even though you're avoiding direct words." The three interviewers exchanged glances, surprised by the change in Caroline's tone of voice. The air in the room seemed to become heavier. "You're telling me, with all possible politeness, that my 297 pounds are a problem for the position, isn't that right? That my intellectual capacity, my academic background, or my professional experience don't matter? The problem is that I'm too fat to represent the company's image." Richard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Caroline, you're misinterpreting our words. We just—" "No, Mr. Mendez," Caroline interrupted him with a calm but firm voice. "I'm not misinterpreting. I'm just translating what you're trying to say with so many nice words. And you know what's most interesting? I've been through this so many times that I can identify each stage of this type of interview." Patricia furrowed her brow, trying to maintain her professional expression. "What do you mean, each stage?" "First comes the surprise, when I enter the room. You expected someone different based on the impressive resume. Then comes the phase of technical questions, where I always do well. Then we reach the part where you try, in a polite way, to say that my body is a problem." Caroline spoke without aggression, but with a firmness that made it clear she wasn't there to be humiliated. Silence took over the room. Louise stared fixedly at her papers, avoiding eye contact. Richard nervously fiddled with his pen. Patricia was the only one who maintained a steady gaze, although her face showed signs of discomfort. "Did you know I've been rejected in 17 interviews in the last 2 years? And in none of them was my weight the official reason. It's always phrases like, 'We're looking for a different profile,' or 'We found a candidate who better fits the company culture.'" Caroline opened her folder and took out some papers. "What's interesting is that I have here some research on productivity and body weight. None of them prove that obese people are less productive, less intelligent, or less competent. In fact, many show that body diversity in the workplace can bring benefits to organizational culture." Richard seemed to want to say something, but Caroline continued. "You know what I hear most often? That fat people are lazy, that they lack discipline. But let me tell you something about discipline. It takes much more discipline to wake up every day, face judgmental looks on public transportation, hear jokes in the elevator, and still maintain my self-esteem and continue seeking opportunities, knowing I'll be judged by my body before I even open my mouth." Caroline's eyes showed no anger, but determination. Her 297 pounds didn't seem to weigh so much, now that she was speaking openly about what she had so often had to swallow in silence. "My obese body doesn't define my abilities. It doesn't define my intelligence, my creativity, or my problem-solving capacity. And, with all due respect, if the image you want to convey to clients is of a company that values only appearance at the expense of talent and competence, perhaps I really don't fit into your culture." The room fell into complete silence. The three interviewers seemed not to know how to react to that unexpected moment. Patricia was the first to speak, with a voice that tried to regain control of the situation. "Caroline, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. We're not—" "No need to explain, Patricia," Caroline interrupted her, putting her papers back in her folder. "I'm not here to accuse you or create a conflict. I'm just speaking openly about something that usually remains between the lines in these interviews." The silence that followed was interrupted by the soft sound of the door opening. A tall man with gray hair and an impeccable suit entered the room. His gaze was penetrating, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. "Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the interruption, but I couldn't help overhearing part of the conversation while passing by in the hallway," he said with a deep and calm voice. "I'm Alexander Vance, president of this company." The three interviewers immediately stood up, with expressions of surprise and embarrassment. Caroline remained seated, her 297 pounds seeming even more visible in front of the imposing figure of the president. "Mr. Vance," Richard said nervously, "we were just concluding the interview with Miss Caroline for the project coordinator position." Alexander Vance observed Caroline for a few seconds before pulling up a chair and sitting next to her, completely ignoring the other three professionals who remained standing. "Ms. Caroline, I'd like to hear more about what you were saying. I rarely encounter candidates who speak with such frankness and courage." Caroline swallowed hard, surprised by the turn of events. She hadn't expected the company president to appear, much less for him to show interest in her words. "Mr. Vance, I was simply expressing how often my professional qualifications are overshadowed by judgments based on my physical appearance." Alexander nodded, thoughtfully. "You know, Ms. Caroline, this company was founded by my mother 45 years ago. She weighed 315 pounds and faced discrimination throughout her professional life." He paused, looking directly at the three interviewers who seemed increasingly uncomfortable. "That's why she decided to create a business where people would be valued for their ideas and competencies, not for their appearance." Caroline felt a lump in her throat. Of all possible responses, this was the one she least expected. "Unfortunately," Alexander continued, "it seems that some values have been lost along the way. You surprised me today, Ms. Caroline. Not just with your courage to speak openly about something that many prefer to ignore, but also with your professional demeanor, even when faced with an unfair situation." Alexander turned to the three interviewers, who now seemed to want to disappear. "I'd like to speak with you later about our company's values and how to conduct interviews ethically and professionally." Turning back to Caroline, he smiled for the first time. "As for you, Ms. Caroline, I'd like to offer you a coffee in my office. I have some ideas about how your experience and qualifications could be better utilized in our company." Caroline felt her heart race. She had entered that building expecting another rejection, another look of contempt disguised as professionalism. Instead, she was being invited by the president for a conversation in his office. On the way to the elevator, Alexander spoke in a low voice. "You know, Ms. Caroline, our company is going through a transformation. We're expanding into new markets and need people who bring not just technical competence, but also a fresh perspective. People who aren't afraid to challenge the status quo." The elevator went up to the top floor, where the presidential office was located. The view of the city was impressive through the panoramic windows. Caroline felt momentarily intimidated by the luxurious environment, but maintained the confident posture she had demonstrated in the interview room. "Please, have a seat," said Alexander, indicating a comfortable armchair that, to Caroline's relief, accommodated her 297 pounds without difficulty. "I'd like to hear your ideas on how we can transform our organizational culture to truly value diversity." Caroline took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. This wasn't just a job opportunity. It was a chance to make a real difference, to transform an environment that had for so long excluded people like her. "Mr. Vance, I believe that true change begins with awareness. Often, prejudice isn't intentional, but the result of unconscious biases that we all carry. The first step would be to create diversity and inclusion training programs for all employees, especially those in leadership positions." Alexander listened attentively, making occasional notes. His genuine interest in Caroline's words was evident, something she rarely experienced in professional environments. "Additionally," continued Caroline, gaining confidence with each word, "we could implement a blind recruitment process where the first stages of selection are conducted without access to photos or information that might reveal physical characteristics of the candidates. Alexander listened attentively, his eyes revealing a mixture of admiration and recognition. "You know, Ms. Carolyn, when I created the Innovation Department 2 years ago, I was looking for exactly this kind of disruptive thinking. People who not only identify problems, but propose concrete solutions." He stood up and walked to the window, contemplating the city for a few moments before turning back to Caroline. "I'd like to offer you the position of director of our new Diversity and Inclusion Department. It's not the position you applied for, I know, but I believe your skills and unique perspective would be much more valuable in this role." Caroline felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. A director position? It was more than she had ever dreamed of, especially after so many doors closed because of her 297 pounds. "Mr. Vance, I'm honored by your offer, but I need to ask. This isn't just a reaction to what happened downstairs, is it?" Alexander smiled, appreciating her frankness. "A fair question. No, Caroline, it's not an impulsive decision. In fact, we've been looking for someone to lead this department for months, but haven't found anyone with the right combination of technical qualifications and human sensitivity. Your reaction in the interview room only confirmed what your resume already suggested. You're exactly the person we need." Caroline couldn't contain a smile. For the first time in her career, her body wasn't an obstacle, but part of what made her valuable to a company. "I have just one condition," said Alexander, sitting back down. "I'd like you to conduct a workshop with our HR team and managers. They need to understand that diversity isn't just a matter of marketing or social responsibility, but a real competitive advantage." "It would be an honor, Mr. Vance." 6 months later, Caroline was standing in front of a packed auditorium. Her 297 pounds were dressed in an elegant, custom-made executive suit, and her posture radiated confidence. The audience consisted of executives from various companies, all there for the first Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Conference organized by her company. "When I entered that building for an interview 6 months ago, I expected another rejection," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Instead, I found an opportunity to transform not just my career, but also the culture of an entire organization." Among the audience, Caroline could see Richard, Patricia, and Louise, the same interviewers who had shown prejudice against her that day. Now, they observed her with a mixture of respect and admiration. Not because she had lost weight, her 297 pounds remained exactly the same, but because she had proven her worth in a way they could no longer ignore. "Prejudice against fat people in the workplace isn't just a matter of social justice," she continued. "It's also a business issue. How many brilliant talents are your companies losing because of judgments based on appearance?"
Alexander Vance, seated in the front row, nodded with approval. Under Caroline's leadership, the Diversity and Inclusion Program had not only improved the work environment but also positively impacted the company's financial results. The employee retention rate had increased, as had customer satisfaction. "My story could have been just another case of discrimination," said Caroline, approaching the end of her speech. "Instead, it became a catalyst for change. And this change doesn't just benefit people who, like me, carry more body weight. It benefits all of us, creating environments where diversity of bodies, minds, and experiences is celebrated, not just tolerated." The audience rose in an enthusiastic ovation. Caroline observed the smiling faces and sincere applause, feeling a wave of emotion. Her 297-pound body, which for so long had been seen as an obstacle, was now an integral part of her strength. As she left the stage, Caroline noticed a young obese woman in the audience, with tears in her eyes and a grateful smile. In that moment, Caroline knew that her story was inspiring others to challenge prejudice and claim their place in the professional world. And as for that job interview, What began as another day of discrimination had transformed into the turning point not just of her career, but also of her life's mission. Her 297 pounds had never weighed so lightly on her shoulders, now carried with the purpose of opening the way for so many others who, like her, deserve to be judged not by their appearance, but by their talent and determination. If you identified with this story, or know someone who has experienced a similar situation, please like this video. Your approval helps spread this important message to more people. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring stories like this. Turn on notifications to be notified whenever we publish new content. Share this video with your friends and family so that together we can build a world with more respect and less prejudice.